Scott County, providing safe, healthy, and livable communities.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're going to do this one just a tad bit differently this morning. Usually we take a few minutes to introduce the topic, but we have a lot of information for you this morning, and so to allow more times for discussion and question. This one really is on asset management and how we take care of our assets. And as you look through it, I think you'll see all the programs are in a little different phase of where they are from a maturity standpoint. Highway is probably most mature. Parks has made a lot of progress, I think, over the course of the last year. Fleet has also done a really good job in implementing their asset management system over the course of the last couple of years and tracking our fleet and our costs. You've seen huge improvement there. And then buildings is probably the one that's got the most to grow. They have a system coming on hopefully this year, which will help with some of that. But as we talk through the data, you can see that they also are making progress in the fleet area. And so with that, we'll introduce ourselves. I'm Leslie Vermillion, the Deputy County Administrator. And then
Brad Davis, Planning Manager.
Lisa Kohner, Office of Public Affairs.
Tony Winnicky, County Engineer.
Joe Wida, Highway Maintenance Operations and Facilities Management.
Amy Gursky, Director of Design, Three Rivers Park District.
Josh Bovey, Three Rivers Park District, Civil Engineer.
Patty Freeman with Scott County and Three Rivers.
Aaron Kudlow, Fleet Supervisor.
and Chris Harder is just walking in.
Deputy Commissioners.
Also on our panel. So with that, why don't Lisa, Brad, Chris, you have some questions you want to start right off with? Go ahead.
I have a couple of very basic questions. Did they change the federal regulations on retroreflectivity, or is it just that we've fallen a little bit behind over the last year?
Sure. So if we want to turn to that one in particular, let's see, that is page 23. So no, that's still in force. That hasn't changed. So a couple things with this. The reason that you see that going down. So our policy is our sign policy is an expected life of that sign, so which is a 15-year life. And then so our secondary measure with this is if we go beyond that, there's a visual inspection with that. So that decrease right there is because literally 400 signs have dropped off that, so they're at that 15 years. So we'll be doing that visual inspection this year. And then we do have dollars in our program for a sign replacement in, I think, 2019 and 2022. So to get us back on track with that.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
Just to follow up on that, it looks like the compliance has slipped a little bit from 15 to 16 to 17. And I'm just wondering what accounts for that slippage and what's the plan to kind of bounce back to, try to get back to 100%?
Right, yeah, that's exactly it right there. So when you look at the number of signs that have fallen off between 2016 to 17, so those signs fell off, therefore we don't have many in compliance right now. When I say in compliance, that's our primary, that 15-year. So we're still okay as long as we're doing a visual inspection of those and if they still meet that nighttime visual inspection. So we'll be doing that this year and getting us back on track.
Tony, as long as we're on sites, do we have signs, if I remember right, we've had federal programs over the years where we've put in bunches and spurts. Is that part of the issue, the age, and they come due at certain times then, or?
It is. So when you look back, there was a big chunk of signs during that time frame. And signs are replaced, it could be through a project, it could be a knockdown of a sign that's got hit by a vehicle. We go out and replace the sign because it's too damaged, not just simply erecting it again. Or we could have an actual sign replacement program. And so back in that year, we did have several signs through a program that we said we've got to get our signs, up to date. And so that's why these have fallen off that radar at this point. So.
I have a quick question, and this is probably not a fair question to ask because it's really more about the state's data than it is about ours. Clearly, we're doing very well with the critical crash rates. We're below the state average. We're very much below the metro average. What happened to the metro in 2013 that created that spike? Was that a redefinition or what happened?
Well, and that's a great question. Thank you. So when you look at the that metro average, the first, and we really could have put this all at a higher range because that 1.7 that you see there is all of the roads. So in the county, that represents all of those. The last 2 years, what we have shown are just the CSAT and county roads. And so you do have a couple of counties, Hennepin and Ramsey in particular, that bring that average way up in their crash rate. But we could have literally shown that all the way across, but it does represent the difference between all the roadways and the CASA and county road.
Got it, thank you.
Tony, what about the rest of the signs? So when you talked about signs, what percent have to meet the federal retroflectivity from a number perspective or percent based on all the signs we have? And what are the difference and why they have to meet that?
Sure. So that federal retroreflectivity has to do with all of our regulatory and warning and route markers. There are some signs that don't fall into that. You know, it's like an adopt a highway sign, parking signs, you know, lower level signs like that. And we intend to get them up to that 100% compliance as well to fall within there. And that does represent that big chunk. When you see that pie chart on page 24, you know, you do see that that's the vast majority of all of our signs anyways. And so we're working towards that.
So we have 1 year's worth of data on the percent of roadway system reapplied annually. So while we're talking in the safety area with signs and striping, what are your thoughts on that? What is our target 100%? What's the different, are there different roads you look at when you're doing that from a
Sure.
safety standpoint?
Yeah, we have, so there's been a lot of changes in this area.
25, I'm sorry, Deb.
So this represents all of the striping that we have out there, so that, you know, 2+ million square feet of pavement markings that we have on there. That's all of our long lines, our pavement messages, could be turn arrows, crosswalk blocks, you know, stop ahead, stop lines. It's all of that marking collectively. And so foremost, we're putting the pavement lines out there, our long lines out there, yellow and white. And so that's why you see, you know, not quite all of the system painted, and we surely would like to, and we put additional dollars over the last several years into our program. So ideally, we can go out and repaint everything every single year. And we've gone through a little bit of change in this area between the type of paint that we use, whether that's a latex or an epoxy being a higher grade, based on activities that we have with our pavement practice and our seal coating. So we used to put more epoxy out there. The seal coats don't stand up as well or adhere to that as well, so we've gone to more of a latex, which requires us to repaint them every single year. So there's been some changes in that regard.
The question I had on this, the numbers for 2017, is that lane miles of marking, or is it square footage?
It's percentage of roadway.
A percentage of the roadway that's been, okay. And then what is the seal coated overlay and striping? Those are different specific programs where you're applying the markings?
Exactly, yeah. It might come in through a normal project. It could come in through our seal coat program. It could come in through our overlay program. And every year we do have a restriping program.
Okay.
Which is the vast majority of that.
Yep.
So we contract out every single year.
Are there pieces of the data, either through the restriping or the overpayment or over pavement, the overlays, are there pieces of that data that you communicate to community members? Like, it was super interesting to read this, because I just take for granted that the roads are going to be good, and I grumble if they're not. And, right, if you're just like a regular citizen, like, I think you just take for granted how these things come to be. And so I'm wondering, is there any of this data that you share at a community level about, you know, we have this many paved roads that meet performance standards or meet indexes? Like, is there messaging to the community about the good work?
But I greatly appreciate your interest, so thank you.
Right? How does that stuff get there? You put it there.
You know, I don't know that we necessarily share with, you know, a township or city that we're doing. I think a lot of people just assume that it's going to get done. And we're working towards that, so it does, you know, every piece of that pavement marking gets done every single year. When I first came on board here, I was kind of picking and choosing and going out and driving literally every road during the night to see how actually they looked, and having to make some decisions because we didn't quite have the budget to restripe every roadway. And, you know, so now we've added some money in there. we've got a little different program going on right now with overall pavement preservation, so we're working towards that, so people really don't ask because they are done every single year.
Okay. And then my other question is there any comparative data, like with other counties or other municipalities that would say, like, how we are able to maintain those roads as compared to other jurisdictions?
I would assume most of the other counties are in the same boat. Again, it comes down to dollars. You know, can you go out and restripe them every single year? I mean, clearly, I think the expectation is there from the public.
Okay.
You know, and we hear about it, and it gets this time of year actually that we start to hear about it as well. There's a lot of salt on the roadway, and the lines start to, blend in with the white of the salt, and they're difficult to see at times.
Yeah.
So, come springtime, we'll definitely start to hear about particular roadways that they feel, aren't showing up as well.
Okay, thank you.
Maybe just as a follow-up to your question, Chris, one of the things that has been occurring at the regional level is that the counties have been working together with the Met Council, and particularly on the A minor, which is a certain subset of typically county roads. We've been putting together operations and maintenance data for those roadways. So at least in the area of pavements and pavement condition and pavement investment, we're starting to look at that as a region and how each county is making investments.
Okay.
So it's still in development, but as we go on in the future, we'll probably have more available to compare to.
Okay, thank you.
I have a quick question just for the fleet area. I'm looking at, well, let's see here. Actually, it's not just for fleet, it's also for facilities too. I'm looking at pages 36 through 40 odd. It doesn't really matter because there's the same graph on every page. Is that a placeholder graph or is that a meaningful measure to what you're looking for in terms of your KPI or anything like that? I'm just seeing the same graph here as county levy as a percentage of total income, and I'm not making the connection to.
So I'll respond to that one.
Okay.
So the small graph, as we've started to move forward now with the program profiles, is one of our community indicators. And so that's the big picture
Okay.
that we're tying back to. And in this case, the county levy as a percent of total personal income is one of them that reflects all of our responsible categories.
Okay.
So facilities and fleet don't fall into the safe, healthy, livable so much from their measures and their KPIs.
Sure.
And so it's more of a efficiency and effectiveness. And
Got it.
so tying that back to that was the decision that was made last fall, Lisa.
Got it, thank you.
So let's talk about those. Safety, Joe, while we're on page 37. You've got a couple of them here. On page, let's go to 38 first, so I don't need, Deb, can you talk to us a little bit about the slips, trips, falls, and how we're doing from your standpoint there, what this is telling you?
Sure. I think overall we're doing pretty good. What the graph indicates here, the green are any incidents that actually happened on our property, whether it was tripping on a uneven piece of pavement or slipping on icy conditions. The blue, the total incidence is countywide, for folks that, maybe somebody from Health and Human Services that has visited somebody's own home and has had an incident. So you can see just the incidents on our property are really relatively low. Majority are this time of year with the snow and ice conditions, but we do get a few of the trips from either uneven pavement or maybe a piece of loose carpeting.
Do you know, like, of those 8, are they seasonal, are they winter, are they, do you have that by?
I don't for 15 and 16, but I know 18 was 6 of the 8 were winter.
In 17?
Yes.
6 of the 8? Winter slips? What does page 39 tell you when you take a look at that one? I thought this was kind of interesting, because you contract for 3 of your major services, right? Lawn, plowing, and cleaning.
Correct. Yep. So again, I think the numbers are pretty good. You can see in 16, we had a little bit of a dip there, between 50 and 60%, meeting the level of service. That was mostly pertaining to our snow and ice control contract. We have different categories that we kind of go by. One being a great concern is if maybe they skip doing a whole parking lot or an entire sidewalk at a building. The low level things are, some instance I can think of, out at MRTS, they didn't get close enough to the garage door, so we had to call them back to, finish cleaning up that 1 foot of snow in the way. So in 16, we were having some multiple issues. One, there was a additional plowing added to their contract. So maybe the first year they had a change in staff. So we had, during the summer, we had a meeting with the vendor, the summer of 16. We had a meeting with the vendor to discuss the issues and kind of get them on track, reiterate our expectations, and you can see here in 17 that, things improved with that vendor.
Were most of the callbacks for snow and ice versus lawn or cleaning, or is it spread out?
It's spread out. There's, on average, it's about 50 times a year for cleaning. Now, again, there's minor things with that. Maybe they, didn't vacuum tight enough to the corners in a certain office, or, they're pretty petty when we do have to call cleaning. Majority were snow and ice, and pretty minimal on, I would say, being a high level of dissatisfaction. Like I say, snow not being close enough. They had a couple incidents where they didn't do some of the sidewalks at MRTS, but we do have it resolved. We had an incident last year of them burying fire hydrants, so it's just and they're very responsive. We've had, their meeting, their contract language, and when we call, they respond, according to the contract, so.
Are most of these contracts annual, or are they multiple year?
They're multiple years. Generally, they're 3 years with an additional 1 or 2 after.
So are you able to use some of this data when you're renegotiating contracts or re-upping contracts with the vendors?
Yeah, in 16, we definitely use that approach, so.
Joe, what about on 37, the staff satisfaction? Now, we have 1 year. Is this something you plan on continuing to do, or?
Yeah, I think we'll continue to do it along with employee relations. We may revamp it a little bit, but I think it's a pretty strong indication that, staff feel safe and their perception of the safety around the facilities is good. Whether it's lighting or the areas they work in, that they feel safe in the areas they work in. I think it's a good indicator. It's important. It's good for employee morale to, think that they're in a safe place to work.
I have a question going back to slides 14 and 15, the percent of trails in compliance with our preventative maintenance schedule and our roadways. I imagine there's a link here when certain roadways are being looked at for preventative maintenance and there's an adjacent trail, you're then also working on that adjacent trail. So are these two data points pretty tied together that eventually the goal is to be at 100% for both the trails and the roadways? Just talk a little bit about this, because it looks like we've improved our performance, but we're still not at our target of 100%. So I'm just trying to imagine what's the plan to get to 100%.
Joe's gonna look to me. I figured he was gonna take this one. With regard to the roadways, we've been working on that for the last few years, trying to raise the level of compliance with our targets. We may at some point need to reevaluate whether or not we have enough money to invest at that level, and either change our performance target or seek additional funding. But we're in the process of having enough data now to be able to analyze that better. With regard to trails, that's a relatively new program, and in fact, this was the first year that we, as the county, actually did preventive maintenance. What you see from the previous years is that one of our cities actually had a program where they did preventive maintenance on county road trails for us. And so we're just now beginning to make investment in that. We have money scheduled to invest in that program again this year, and we're working on a cost-sharing arrangement with our cities so that we can do that more in partnership. In the past, trail maintenance in the cities has been primarily a city responsibility. And so what you see in 2017 is the trails that are either part of the regional trail system where we did some work or are in the unincorporated area of the county, which we have not been doing any maintenance on, and that mileage is reflected in that total. So this is really an emerging program for us. We've had an ongoing preventive maintenance program with seal coating in the past on our roadways, but I think we are now finally getting into a sequence that we're comfortable with, and we just need to track it better, and hopefully at some point we'll be able to raise the bar. Whether or not at our current level of investments we could ever get to 100%, I don't think we can.
Lisa, would you have a vision or like a best hope for 2018, like knowing you, like 100% maybe is not a place you're going to get to, like in a year, where would you like to see those numbers in 2018?
Well, they've been rising by about 10% or so each year. We had a little less in between 2016 and 2017, but that would be our goal, that we would continue to climb by about 7 to 10% each year.
Okay, thanks.
I have two questions for parks. One should be an easy one, the other one may not be. First of all, Three Rivers, what is a PACER evaluation? What does that stand for?
So that's the evaluation that we use for our trails and roads and parking lots. It was developed by the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and it's basically a visual inspection. So it's a range from 1 to 10,
Okay.
10 being basically new pavement and a 1 being pavement that's basically crumbling. So each number, 1 through 10, has a certain amount of cracks or deformities in it, so we can be consistent, have consistent ratings throughout the entire park district network.
Got it. And now, is that a universal standard for most parks, or is that just one that Three Rivers?
This one that we chose to use, we looked at a few different standards, and this one seemed to work well for us.
Gotcha. As long as we're talking about standards, I'm just going to page 6 here, talking about some of the difficulties or some of the obstacles right now. That you note here is that between Scott County and Three Rivers, there are still 2 different policies and processes that you're working on. Is that something that is achievable within a certain amount of time? Is it going to have to be evolving over a series of years? I'm just kind of curious, because that seems to be kind of a critical gap there, so if you're not using the same kind of...
Yep, I can take this one. And I think it sounds a little more serious than it is.
Okay.
So we've, over the last year, really created quite a system of communicating between the highway pavement group and the Three Rivers pavement group.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say where we may have gaps is more about wrangling 2 sets of people and making sure that we're communicating properly and sort of who's going to be in charge of what pieces. And I would say we're almost there. There may be, because we have 2 different boards, governing the 2 different groups, I think aligning culture with a standard comes into play, and I don't know that we've had dug deep into that with the county board.
Mm-hmm.
So because the Park District has many years of experience in their pavement management program, we've sort of adopted theirs with some tweaks based on some feedback from Joe Witta. But I would say the next big step is to say, does the standard that the park district uses, is that resonating with the county? So that's what I mean by gaps.
Thank you.
Yeah. Can I just clarify one thing too, when we were talking about the trails chart that Joe was speaking to and Lisa, those are distinct from the regional trails, so those are the county road trails. I just wanted to mention that.
So why don't you talk about page 28 then a little bit, Patty, where the condition of our trails are in the parks, and it looks like Cedar Spring, we've just kind of brought those into the process now from a data standpoint.
Sure. So we have three, you can see there's for the parks that we've had paved trails for a number of years, we have 3 data points. Cedar Lake Farm was newly paved in, I think it was 2015. Spring Lake in 2012, so you can see we just have the one data point. You can see, for example, Cedar Lake Farm, the Pazer was done in 2016. It was fresh pavement, just, brand new trails constructed, and those were evaluated at a Pazer level of 10, and that would be the reason why they're brand new. If you look over at, if you look at Spring, you might question, why is this a little below an 8 when those are brand new trails? And I can tell you why. When we, about 10 years ago, we inherited a pretty long segment of trail from the city of Prior Lake. And that particular segment is rates a little bit lower than the rest of the new system, so that would drag that overall scale. So if we had these graphs for each of the parks, we could actually indicate which segments of trail were at which rating. Also included in here is pavement condition for parking lots and park entrance roads, so it's not just trails.
Okay.
So how does this help you plan when you're taking a look at where you're going to invest in then in your future trails over the next couple of years? Where are you headed?
Want me to take that first? Sure. Well, I think it's a double check. Is our rating system working? So if we're out there, if we have our everything is scheduled, so we now are saying approximately every 7 years a trail will receive some sort of pavement treatment. And then if we're going out and rating those, we should be able to predict somewhere where they're going to come in. If they're coming in lower, then we know we need to adjust things, and maybe there's an issue that needs to be addressed. So this is sort of a checking in on, is the system working? That's how I would describe it. Amy or Josh, did you want to add to that at all?
No, I mean, that's exactly right. We look at, for trails, for example, we ideally get almost 30 years out of it. When it's constructed, we try to do preventative maintenance called microsurfacing or a seal coat every 7 years, and that will help maintain it, hopefully at a Pazer rating of 7 or above. Once you start getting into 6, we have to do a little more evaluation. There might be some additional repairs for, maybe there's some root damage or some sections that just need to be completely reconstructed. So we'll do, might be a 20-foot length. So we reconstruct that and then microsurface the rest of it. So it allows us to plan accordingly. And if let's say a trail's about 20 years old and it's due for another microsurfacing at year 21 and condition, we notice about a few years before, hey, it's at a 6 or 5, then we know, hey, it's not going to get the life that we need. We're not going to be able to do preventative maintenance on it. We have to look at moving up the reconstruction. So that's kind of how we go upon it. And then after our third microsurfacing, if, man, this trail's really maintained at a higher level, 6s and 7s, we can maybe extend it out past the 30 years.
Do you adjust that 7-year cycle depending on the type of use that's on that trail?
Not the use. We have a 6 to 8 year range, so for budgetary reasons, we can adjust it that way. We try to maximize the time between microsurfacings to prevent the disruption to the trail users. So obviously the higher used trails, we want to push that at 7 years, but we haven't done any preventative maintenance less than 6 years typically.
So you use a 0 to 10 scale, they use 0 to 100. The county board's goal was 72 for your PQI. So it's, what I'm hearing you say, at 7, that's a pretty good number for like a 85th percentile curve or something for you to be at on average then. And then at 7, that's when you deem it, all activities can use that type of trail then? Is that kind of the number you're looking at?
Well, for preventative maintenance purposes, in, I think it was 2009 or 2010, Park District did a study on when do we get complaints on the condition of the trails, and a Paiser level of, I think it was like 3.8 was when people really started complaining, so really poor condition. So our philosophy is a Paiser of 4 is basically our drop dead where we want to get it reconstructed. So 7 to 10, we can do our preventative maintenance. It moves pretty well. 6 for trails, we may have to do some additional reconstruction. Once we're at 5 and 4 Paiser, we just are pretty much and let it go. And it could be a 5 for 7, 8 years, depending on what the deterioration is. So that's kind of how we do it. We want to keep it up at a 7 so we can continue our preventative maintenance. That's the priority. But once it gets to a level where we can't do that, we're in let it go, and we're watching it, and then we can adjust our budget accordingly. But try to have some funding, 10 years out that we can maybe shift around if needed.
With so many miles of trails, do you feel like you have adequate data to make, because you're really like paying attention to specific segments of trails even. Do you have the data you need to monitor that?
Yes, we do. Every 2 years, we do the Paiser rating. So our technicians, they drive each mile of trail and give it a rating.
So go to 21, could you, Deb? So, Joe, I don't know, Lisa, 20, that's your percent of system. So I'm assuming it's kind of the same story then. You're very good to fair, and then you're poor, they're in that same type of a...
It is. I'll answer part of this here, and Joe and Lisa can jump in here. But once it gets to that point, and you'll see, from 2005, 9, 13, 17, if you look at the fair category, you saw it start to go up. And once it kind of drops off into that poor, it's going to go to very poor fairly quickly. So you get to that decision point. We're trying to maintain, that overall system, but you're looking at, every specific roadway and making those decisions from a maintenance standpoint. So, getting into when we're talking about seal coating and trying to, achieve that maintenance rate of 7 years, you may get to a point going, it's beyond that. We may let this one go. And maybe a few more years or not doing that seal coat, and so you know that you're going to have some land in there, knowing that you've got to replace that. But our goal is to stay away from that, to reduce that fair rating, so we're keeping them in the very good and good. So when they fall off, they don't fall hard and get into that poor and very poor. I think we've all driven on a poor and very poor road at some point in our life, and why it's not being replaced.
The other part of that too is that when they fall into the fair and the poor category, the types of fixes that you can do are really different. You need to look at whether or not you should be doing a full depth reclamation or maybe even a reconstruction. Right now we don't do a lot of reconstruction of our roadways, so we've been working with more full depth reclamations and some other techniques to try to build strength to our roadways that are in that condition. So hopefully they'll stay, once they get done, in that very good and good category longer and be more serviceable. So those are some of the decision making that we've been going through, looking at the individual corridors, and even sometimes it's smaller segments within the corridors. What we find, particularly out in the rural area, is that the subgrade of those roadways are not what we would do in today's standards, and so for subgrade, that has an impact on the length or the life of that roadway and how we can maintain it as well. So we're trying to balance all of those things as we pick the right fix for that roadway when it comes up for repair.
Could you say a little more, still on page 21, it says in the narrative that it's important to limit the percentages of fair to keep that below 30, and you guys are meeting that standard. Like, what kinds of things make it possible for you to maintain those high percentages in the very good or good category? What contributes to that performance?
Well, we have a pavement investment program, and for the first, so we call it our pavement preservation program. It's part of our transportation improvement program, and it's the overlays and our reclamation program that we do every year. When in probably 2000, the mid-2000s, we upped our level of investment to 3 to 4 million a year. And then as the numbers came in, we still were concerned with the growth and the fare and the poor. So in 2014-15 timeframe, we actually increased our investment, really shifting from our expansion program and shifted the dollars that we had available to us into pavements. So we've been putting more money into pavements the last 4 to 5 years. As well, with the floods that happened in 2014, a number of our roadways were severely damaged. As a part of that process and through the programs that we had to repair them, we were able to, in a couple of cases, actually get them resurfaced as well. And so with those efforts, we've been moving things into that good and very good category with that increased investment.
Thank you.
For the road segments that are fair or poor, do you ever make decisions when you're permitting oversized loads or weight restrictions or detour routes, or does any of that data kind of come into play when you're making some other decisions about the system? You look at the pavement quality.
Well, we don't permit overweight, we'll permit oversize. And of course, we look at the routes that they're proposing, you know, so we do look at our bridges and our pavement condition, and we do make decisions based on that. But we definitely ensure that it's not an overweight. So they may have to add additional trailers or wherever their hauling is to make sure that they're under that so they're not further damaging the roadway.
So if you go to 13, that kind of shows the total, right? I mean, the response to what the investment has been. The other one is, hasn't 42 received some pavement funds too as well from being on the National Highway System? Or you guys have been able to utilize some additional funds there too, right?
Yep, we've got a project program in 2021 for from 27 to from Louisiana to the Dakota County line.
That's a pretty significant project. When you do an overlay like that, what's the estimate on something like that for a 4 to 6 lane wide road for
That one right there, I think we're in like 1.5 million,
Yeah.
1.7 million.
just for the overlay alone?
Yeah.
I'm going to ask a holy grail question, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot. I'm not asking anybody to speculate, but I'm just going to ask the big question in my mind. Are you aware of any ratio, how do I say this? For every dollar spent on preventative maintenance or investments or reconstructions or facility maintenance, any sense of how much we save over the lifetime of the project? Is there ever been any studies that you've seen that have discussed that? That's why I said I don't want you to speculate just off the top of your head. I'm just wondering if you've ever encountered kind of that measure of investment versus return.
I think from the pavement side, there's actually been a lot of studies in regards to that, and I wish I had that pavement deterioration curve to throw up on the screen to show you. So it is the things like we're talking about, and trails would kind of be the same thing, but because of the loads that the roadways carry, that it shows if you have those, you know, those seal coats, so as it's deteriorating, you can kind of bump that up and bump it up and bump it up. So yes, it's deteriorating some, but not to the rate that it normally would if you did nothing. And so I think there's been a lot of studies done to show that the preventative maintenance definitely helps from the crack sealing and the seal coating and preventing that oxidation on the surface, because that's when you start to really get the deterioration of the roadway. You get the water that's coming in, and pretty soon it starts to, the cracks start to propagate up. And even if you put, you know, an additional layer of pavement on that, those cracks will continue to propagate upward. So if you can prevent that right away up front, you know, the first several years are critically important to make sure that that pavement's not oxidizing.
And that's a change, right, in what you're doing there with your seal coating?
Correct. Yep. So historically, it's been every 7 years you pave it, and then in 7 years you crack seal and seal coat. We're moving to a accelerated program with that to within the first year, if not the same year. We are this year going to seal coat the roads the same year we pave them. That's just like Tony said, to prevent that oxidation. The sun is a huge killer on the pavements, along with the freeze thaw. So we have last year we seal coated some roads that were only 1 year life in them. The performance so far has been excellent. We've seen it in the past. The older roads where the pavement is oxidized and it's all dried out in the top. We're seeing a lot of stripping when you seal coat it. So it's pretty much, the industry is shifting the same direction that we're moving. So I think it'll be good.
So we're going to go to you, Aaron, and I appreciate your being here today. I know it's kind of a tough day for a bunch of crews sitting around here. Troy lost his wife yesterday, and Troy would have been here. And Aaron is sitting in for him, and I know Troy is really proud of this system and the data that we're getting from it and what we're doing. And so why don't you talk us through your fleet and how you're using it and what we're seeing with the data that you have today. If we go to page, let me get us here, page 43, I think it is. You have two systems going on, one with the,
Yeah, we have the Agile and also the AssetWorks. And we're starting to get some information into our AssetWorks where we have 2.5 years of data in there now. So we're starting to glean some of the profits, I can almost call them, with the data that's in there, and helping us make some of our equipment decisions, replacement decisions. There's getting to be quite a bit of good information. Also, it's a really robust, I can almost say that, program. We still haven't used every area of it. We're still learning it to a point. There's so many different facets of it. It seems like every time we turn around, there's something else that we're learning that's new in there.
so that'd be on page 45. I got you to the wrong page here, right? But this is where you're starting to look at compliance, right, and the benefits of your PMs?
Yep. And that's important to us because we feel that we want to be doing the preventive maintenance to eliminate more of the breakdown part of it. So we try to get to the problem and take care of the problems before they actually develop to become bigger problems and more troublesome and more costly. So we really strive, and we're getting better. Some of it was a little bit on the way we were putting our information in our new software. Where, like I said, when you first get a software, you think you know it pretty good, but there's certain reports now that there's good information in there, and I think we are on the right track. We are improving, and we definitely will continue to improve. Some of that is working with the different departments. We work with every single department in the county. Some departments are a little bit more difficult, and I certainly can't take the vehicles away from when I need them. I have to work around their schedule, so it's getting a little bit better. But.
So this is the one that tells you PMs by time. So this is the units you're getting to on time then?
Yes, this shows actually the ones on time, and it's listed by department. There's certain departments where we might only see a vehicle once a year, and then there's some departments where we'll see that vehicle, we can see it 15 to 20 times in a year's period of time, strictly depending on how many miles and how many hours that they put on different pieces of equipment. So there's quite a bit of variance in there. So, and what throws it off, like I said, we're generally trying to strive in advance, is if I have a vehicle that only comes once a year and I'm late that once, I'm 100% out of compliance. So some of them show up pretty fast, but we are moving in the right direction. We've even looked at some outside sourcing on some of our preventive maintenance. We have a contract with a vendor that actually will pick up our vehicles when we're not working. So it works out better for all the employees, plus for us, that they're able to take care of those services. So then our uptime is better, and we don't have the downtime.
So I would assume the sheriff's office is probably one, they go 24/7. You guys don't work that. So is that one that we?
That's one it's a little bit more difficult. They have quite a few vehicles, which I don't even know the number off the top of my head. We see those vehicles every 3,000 miles where we do a safety inspection. We service it every other one where we actually do the oil or lube service. So they come around pretty fast. If we have a vehicle that's running 24 hours a day, we see it every 3,000 miles. And we do that for safety reasons, because we want to look at their tires and their brakes, and they are a high-speed safety vehicle, so we keep pretty good tabs on them. But
Are there things, Aaron, that, because it looks like the performance around your ability to do timely maintenance is improving, and one of the things you mentioned was the software and your staff learning that process. Are there other things that are helping to make sure those are happening more timely?
I think when we set up some of the contracts with our outside vendor that we're using, that helped quite a bit, because it gives us the ability, especially in our agile motor pool software, we can actually go in there and make a reservation on it for maintenance, and they can come at 4 o'clock at night and pick them up, or
So
on a
those off
Saturday.
hours.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that's helped out quite a bit.
Are there next steps? Like, you have a 95% goal, which is pretty high. Are there next steps for your department?
Just do a better job. Like I said, we are moving in the right direction,
Yeah,
and
for
we're
sure.
trying to really, I won't say it's a learning curve. Some of it is really getting used to the system. Our software actually will tell me, we have like on the squad vehicles, we have 1,000-mile. It notifies me when they're within 1,000 miles. And we're in the process of implementing where it will automatically send an email to the officer when his vehicle is due, and he can go to the calendar and actually select the time to come in. Because the calendar will show what we have available for hours and stuff, and I think that's gonna really, really help things out.
You have pretty high user satisfaction, it looks like, on the, is it 43?
43.
So that's a nice thing to see.
Yeah, it is. It is very nice to do that.
And it's the staff that's the highest one.
They do a nice job.
Can I just ask one quick question? How many miles does a squad car put on? I'm thinking if they went 10 miles an hour, 24 hours a day, they could be in every week.
We, actually, the new vehicles that we purchase every year for the squads, we have them on I think it's a 3-year replacement schedule because of the miles. The first year that they're put out on the streets, they're actually a 24-hour day vehicle. So they'll take the brand new ones and put the most miles on them. Then after the first year, then they'll go into a single unit. But in that first year, 50, 60,000 miles.
So 1,000 miles a week or so.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
They come around pretty fast.
Yep, okay.
Are there opportunities to partner with our cities? They're doing the same work, I imagine, in all the police cars and other emergency vehicles. How much is there kind of that sharing of the resources or knowledge between?
Well,
counties?
we're actually in the same software with Carver, City of Carver, City of Shakopee, City of Burnsville. We do have very similar equipment and all the lawnmowers, the plow trucks and all that stuff. There's a little bit of difference in the PMs. Everybody's allowed to set up their own. I mean, we don't have too much variance, but they're, like say the City of Burnsville, they're using they're using a straight, higher level synthetic oil, and they believe in running them. And their usage is different than ours. I mean, we're driving the whole county and they're driving, block by block, so there is some variables that are still there. We do share quite a bit of data and information with each other, and we actually get together at least twice a year, if not more, and actually share information with one another.
The board might not be aware of the public. I think the asset management system that the shop uses is probably one of the brightest spots in our technology. We do share it. They allow us to buy down those costs, the departments and the different communities. Is it 5 of us?
There are 5 or 6.
It keeps getting added to. This is a company that allows us to buy down, share. They work together. They come up with solutions together. And it has probably been, when we look at our technology roadmap for where we want to go with business technology, I think AssetWorks is probably one of the brightest spots in that, and being able to share and do the types of things that we set forward.
Yeah, it's really a win-win software, because it gives access to a robust software where otherwise it would be simply too expensive for certain municipalities to be able to do that. So it works out very well.
So your page 49, your uptime, that's the other thing you track.
Yeah, basically, we try to provide vehicles and/or equipment when the department needs them. That's why we track our uptime. It doesn't do us any good if we've got their vehicles sitting in our shop for 3 months out of the year when they're actually needing it, so that's why we track it. We try to keep all of our vehicles available for use and ready to go whenever and if ever.
So one of the things that I found interesting is working with everybody, getting ready for this one, was the value of our assets in the county. I mean, it's a lot of money. The highway system at 257 million, the buildings in excess of 47 million. The fleet now, that was 2.9 million, Aaron, and that's after it's been depreciated,
Correct.
which says something to me about the age.
Mhm.
What's the value if you had to replace the fleet when I looked at your data?
If we had to replace everything at today's price, it'd be $13,217,000.
About $13 million worth. Do we take a look at that average age? So you said we rotate the squad cars every 3 years. What is a snowplow life? What are we doing there?
We'd like to get it down to like a 10-year. We're still, I think, at about a 13 to 15-year, a little bit of variable there. Funding's always a big issue, and they are very expensive pieces of equipment. So, you know, if I, and it's not that we can't move them. I think we have a pretty well set program right now, and our fleet is definitely getting better. And our resellability on the vehicles that we have been getting rid of has gone up increasingly over the last 4 or 5 years also, which helps offset the physical responsibilities on it too. But we you know, it's always a financial thing. We look at the entire fleet and every department, and we meet with the departments every year, and we've actually been able to downsize vehicles in some departments by using our software on usages and different things. And we have shared vehicles also at the courthouse here, especially different departments where they're able to actually use each other's vehicles for different where we don't need as many vehicles too, so.
So the fleet's decreased.
Yeah, we did, it was actually when taxation and environmental health, when they actually use each other's vehicles independently. They're still their department vehicles, but they're able to share, so we were able to remove one vehicle out of there.
So Patty, some future stuff for you I was looking at, because we talked about the maturity of where you guys are with your assets and maintaining them. Some thoughts on that and where you're headed as we looked at some of your future, I think it was page 3, no, excuse me.
7 maybe?
7.
Yeah, I think we're poised to make pretty good progress on some of the other infrastructure, culverts and that sort of thing. And part of the getting going on that is some of the gap is similar to what I mentioned, the policies, and it's working with 2 different groups and making sure we're really, really communicating what assumptions are out there, who's collecting what data. And I think we've made a lot of progress over the last year. We have some preliminary information on condition of wells, some culvert information. So I see us making progress in the next year on that. In buildings, there's a new software that the Park District, I believe, will be utilizing here in the upcoming year. We have a lot of data collected. I'm going to have Amy speak to it a little bit more because it's not quite ready to go live. We've gone through some exercises where we have real high level, this could be the case, this could be where we're at, but it's not really ready to be used as real data.
Correct.
Is that about?
Just the number of buildings that we have within the Three Rivers parks alone, we're trying to get a handle on, and then once we get a handle on that, we'll be able to apply that same knowledge to the Scott County Parks buildings. So we've entered all the data in the system, and it's a cartograph, or we originally had it in software up until a year ago called REBA, which is specifically for asset management of building facilities. And then the Park District Maintenance and Public Works Group went to Cartograph completely for managing all of their assets. And so we've now worked on transferring all that data into this Cartograph software. And now it's really just testing the data. We're kind of in that phase of testing the data and getting the staff buy-in, to be perfectly honest, of what this is going to tell us before we can really go live and be confident in what we're selling.
So that's a pretty big one, and especially as we're contemplating growing the system. And I think similar to culverts and wells and some of the other infrastructure, I think over the next year we'll have a much better understanding of where we're at with the park district on that side, and we can report back to the county.
Will there be some discussion on fleet? That was another one you had in
Oh,
here
yes.
too as well, was the fleet. How does that go back and forth between the two agencies?
Sure. I think there's a lot to be learned across the two organizations on fleet. At this point, the park district is managing through their fleet system all of the park fleet. Through the county's partnership with Three Rivers, we're contributing to the cost of maintenance of those vehicles, to replacement. Every year our operating budget contributes to what they call an ISF fund, the Internal Services Fund, that maintains funding to replace those things. And Doug Behrens, the Director of Maintenance, is in charge of that. And I think we need to establish some relationships and communication back and forth so that the county can learn from the park district and vice versa. So a little bit more information to be shared at a future date.
I'm just going to jump on that concept of partnerships, if I could, just for a second. I'm just going to page 7, Highways Next Steps. And it looks like you intend to start pursuing a global agreement for highway drainage and trail preservations with the cities. I'm going to throw you a really big grapefruit here. Is this under the auspices of SCALE or any SCALE initiative?
Actually, it's been something that we've been working on for a number of years, and it's been focused on the 3 northern cities to begin with, and we don't quite have it all wrapped up yet. There's still a couple of loose ends, and with changing staffs at the communities, we need to re-educate again. So we have a meeting that we're setting up in March to talk about this, as well as our cost participation policy with the cities. And we would like to extend that policy or the global maintenance agreement concept to all of the communities in Scott County, because it does, particularly in the trail area, involve some cost sharing that we in the past didn't do if they participate. And so we think there's a benefit for our communities to engage in that way. So it isn't really being done under SCALE per se,
But it's scalable.
But it's scalable, yes.
Other questions, Brad, Chris?
No?
Can I just ask for the parks people, I just wanted to comment on there's two data pieces about how safe people feel in parks. One if you've recently visited a park and one if you haven't. And I'm wondering, that information comes from a resident survey, and I'm wondering if that, is that is that usable information for you, or are there different questions for the resident survey that would be more helpful to you?
For the Scott County resident survey?
Yep.
There might be. I think dialogue on that in the future would be good for the next survey. Just, I think that particular question is helpful. Are there additional ones that would be useful? Probably. I think over the years we haven't had as big of a role in the parks area in those questions. There's another resident survey that the park district does every 5 years too. So you may have noticed there's 2 different resident surveys and then an actual in-park survey. So we do have a good opportunity through the park district's survey every 5 years to really drill down to how are people feeling about regional parks in Scott County. I hate to use this word odd, but the oddity of that is there's always the question of when those phone calls are made and that survey is conducted, by a professional, survey company, very similar to how the county does its resident survey. But are the people responding really understanding that, because the topic of Three Rivers is in there, what impact is there in us really figuring out, are people understanding they're at Cedar Lake Farm or Spring Lake and answering on quality or whatever the question is. We're working with the research department at Three Rivers the last few weeks to try to tackle that issue, because we will be doing, I think the last survey was done in 2013, so 2018 is the 5-year mark where they're going to redo those surveys, and we thought this is the time to really make sure we feel confident about those results. So I don't know that the resident survey that the county does needs to have a lot of park questions, because we're fortunate in that we have the Three Rivers one, but there's definitely a little bit of a difference, I would say, when the people are responding. And so we just want to make sure that we're being really clear about what facilities are we really asking people about. And I think we want folks that are answering the Park District survey to understand that there's a partnership and that the county has a role in delivering the service. And I think that we're doing a good job on that. I think that this next coming survey will cover that a little bit better.
Thank you.
That's one of the things you hit on, was the change in some of the maintenance, right, for the trails and where it's coming from?
What do you mean by that?
When you talked about the maintenance and the funding coming from the capital improvement plan, that's been a change too, right? With the county putting some of those dollars in.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. So I would say prior to about 3 years ago, the source of funding for preventative maintenance on the trails largely came from regional funds through our partnership with Three Rivers. And currently, the 5-year plan has that coming directly from the county. So it's from the tax base, from the levy. And the regional funding that we're getting, we're utilizing for expansion and other things.
Other questions from the panel? Audience? Gotta have at least one back here.
I can ask one.
All right,
I'm kind of
Pam.
curious about page 34. So I would guess maybe Joe on this one. The cost of operating per square foot for our buildings. There are 2 questions kind of related. There seems to be a wide range, so from under $4 to probably over $9 per square foot to operate. Can you talk a little bit about why such a variation? And then my other question is, how do you use this data? So what does it tell you? Do you make changes based on it's getting too expensive to operate, or?
Sure. So, as you can see, the higher end numbers, so like the JAF, the training facility, some of those are, one, the RTF is obviously an older building, one. 2, it is, on a lot of days, a 24-hour operation. And then so another thing that goes into the cost of the RTF is the ranges. So the more use of the ranges, the more the blocks have to be changed out, which is very expensive. Okay. So that has a lot between the age and the effect on that. The JAF, as you can see, we've decreased there. That's another 24-hour building. But the other thing with that building is our investment we've made into the capital with that. Furnaces, air conditioning were replaced, so that's helped dramatically in that. The LEC, even though it's a 24-hour operation, you can see that steadily climbing. A lot of that is, one, the building is starting to get a little bit older now, but 2, the main effect is with that is the utility portion of it and the amount of inmates in there. So more inmates, the more pods being utilized, lighting goes up, water goes up. Overall, I think we're starting to get there right now. Kind of globally, the average is $8.26 a square foot for office buildings. Now, the LEC, you can't really classify as an office building, but That 826 average right now in 2018 is where it's at, and some parts of the nation are as high as $12. So I think we're going to, continue to see declining costs here as we invest in the capital. We're a little short, we got a little bit behind, several years ago during the recession, but we're slowly ramping up and got everything on a good replacement schedule now. So. Did that answer both of them?
Joe, that is one area you're also trying to improve, right? As the new system goes into play, is your time card for your preventive, and I don't know if you want to talk to that. That's, I guess, where you'd want to be a year from now, right?
Yeah, so that's a big factor, our time coding. We need to do some improvements in our time coding area. As you all know, we have the Facility 360 system now, and that only really tracks work orders and our PMs. And once we move into the new asset management software, we'll be able to track, guys will be able to clock in where they're at on a project per piece of equipment. And then also working out our time coding better. Right now there's, the PMs, for instance, come in as a 360. So some guys will code their time to 360. Some guys will code it to PM. So our data was kind of really offset as far as that. But the new system should really help improve that and these numbers.
What else? Randy? Nothing? Kurt, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. So I walked in a little bit late. Did we cover sheet 23 before I logged in about the signage in the county? Is that covered?
I think it was.
Was it? Okay. I missed that before we got here, so I just wanted to make sure that was covered with the sheer volume of signs that we have in the county and the federal requirements of it and the required signs versus the non-required signs. And so that's been covered. Great, thank you.
Anybody else? Laura?
So on page 7, there is listed with fleet that there's a goal to reduce the size of the fleet, and that just struck me as a little surprising, hearing a lot about how we're getting more and more into the community. Can you talk to me a little bit about that, why that would be a goal we have set, or how you see that fitting into the vision?
Well, it's kind of, as I stated before, we want to be as efficient as we can with the dollars that we have available. And by looking at good data that we have and the couple of different softwares that we have, one of our goals is to have a right-sized fleet, and we don't want extra vehicles sitting around that we don't need or aren't necessary. And I guess that's about what the biggest reason that we do that is we just want to make sure our fleet size is correct, because that has an effect on the budget looking forward, because we go out to, I think it's 2032 on our actual plan. If we have an extra vehicle in there, that affects every 10 years or whatever that budgetary on that particular year that vehicle falls on. So we just want to make sure we have the right size. We want to make sure all the departments have the vehicles and the equipment that they need for them to do their job, but we don't want to make sure that we don't have extra ones that aren't required.
Does it help you, building on Lori's question, I would think it would help you decide whether we lease or purchase as well, certain types of equipment, if it's...
Yeah, and actually, we did check into the leasing. Unfortunately, they want a lot of money to do that. I would have thought that there would have been better opportunity there, and every time that we've checked into it, it has not been as to date. I will also state, though, that we do use, as our vehicles get replaced and they come into our fleet, the new vehicles come into the fleet starting anywhere April and May. We use those extra vehicles all summer long in the departments that have the extra staff. Like Project Delivery this year, I think they have 5 extra vehicles that they're going to be using. And then in the fall, when we're done with those, then we'll put them on auction and sell them out when they're done.
So this talks a little bit about your projections and cost, and then how you do with the auction as well, correct?
Correct.
We're getting better at estimating, it looks like.
It is. There's a lot of variables. It's a constant moving target. I had one particular vehicle where there was a change in the model, and all manufacturers do that periodically. Well, I purchased the same vehicle last year for $6,500 less than that vehicle was this year. And that's really hard to plan for that when you got a kind of a set budget on where your dollars are up for everything every year. So it's a juggling act a lot of times, but it's come pretty close.
I can hear him cursing us from out at the Public Works building. And some of them, we have vehicles that go down, don't we? They just,
Yeah, we do, and we have had to replace, my first year that I was here, and I believe it was either, I can't remember if it was 13 or 14, but we had 2 vehicles that had some major engine problems, and it made more cost-effective sense because they were coming up for replacement, and within a couple of years, to just move the vehicle and replace it a little bit early.
you can see it in the actual spent versus the budget amount in 14, yeah. Other questions?
I have just one last question for Erin around the customer satisfaction survey. I've used AgileFleet. I've never seen a satisfaction survey. So like how many people are responding to that and where is it?
It varies. For us that have administrative, it actually shows, every time you use a motor pool vehicle, you have the ability to fill out that survey every single time. And I can't remember how it's laid out on it.
If I can follow up, Aaron, it's on the bottom of the main page, there's a feedback link that's on the bottom of the main page. We have people that click on that and can submit feedback, or every about 6 months or so, we try to send out an email to users of the motor. If you've used MotorPool site for a vehicle, you will get an email asking you to please fill out this feedback form. So
It's
maybe
better
we gotta
to-
do a better job of putting a link on there.
Yeah, it is better to have participation so we know that it's actual feedback.
But I think, in general, just to show the data, I think we've had probably 200, 250 feedback statements last year from 2017 that came in.
Wasn't too
So where would Highway like to be a year from now if we were sitting here when you are with the board talking about assets? What would you like to have gotten accomplished over the next year?
Well, I think, in general, I think when you look at everything that's in here, and there's a ton of information in here, I definitely think that we recognize that we are a data-driven group, and we've got several others that are in development right now. And we've got some staff, a few of them in the audience here, that are greatly involved on a regular basis with that. We've incorporated a lot in here, to date, but I think it will help us make decisions both from an operating and maintenance standpoint, as well as, when to replace things, so planning for replacement. So the better we get in tune with our data, the better we'll be able to make decisions, both maintenance and planning for replacement. So we're definitely more in line than we ever were, and I think there's still lots of room for improvement, and I think this year we'll be able to better populate this and kind of get things in line where we want to go. So specifically where we want to go, I don't have an exact answer, but I love the direction that we're going right now.
How about facilities?
Kind of the same note, that's, getting the better data, getting the asset management system, up and running so we know our data and have better planning mechanisms in place. I feel pretty confident in a year's time we'll be there and up and operating with that, so. Processes, kind of getting some of our processes better defined and in place as well.
I think buildings, I think we need to understand there's been great progress with collecting data and then bringing it from one system into another. And I think we need to understand what that means so that we can plan for what are our expenses in the next 10 years and 20 years. I think that's the big one. And then I think for Parks Fleet, I think there's some education between the two organizations. But I think buildings is the first big one, yeah.
I hope we keep moving in the similar direction. No more surprises on vehicles going down. No, we continue to analyze, like I mentioned previously, that we get more and more information into our softwares, and there is a lot of information there, and we continue to analyze that, and even down to, like I mentioned, we have an outside vendor. We try to be as efficient as we can. We have more than enough work that we can handle with the number of people. with repairs and the PM work. And if it's more efficient to have an outside vendor do some of our work, and the data shows that, not all of it, but some of it, then that's the position we're going to take.
Mr. Chairman, for you to ask a question?
Okay, Commissioner Orwick had a question.
I actually have a few. On the seal coat, I know you've got data there on what you would like to have in terms of pavement quality, but I guess I'd like to know more in data about your crack seal versus your seal coat program. I wonder if you should break out goals in terms, and maybe they're there, I just don't see them, in terms of 7 years for seal coat, but you sometimes do crack seal twice before you do, I mean, or how much crack seal is needed? I mean, I just know that crack seal costs a fraction of the whole seal coat thing, so, and I kind of routinely see areas, I don't know if they're all county, but where crack seal will be occurring, but they're not seal coating, but just because there's cracks in the road and they want to get through a freeze and thaw cycle, and so I guess I'd like to know more. Are we spending enough on crack seal, or what's the goal there for crack seal? What's the goal there for seal coat? You said every 7 years, but I think there could be more data there.
Yeah, sure. So Commissioner Hart, crack seal is really, really hard to predict. It could vary by the year amount of winters, but our current program is crack seal a year prior to the seal coat. So that's why you may see a road getting crack sealed and but not seal coated. Generally, it's a year prior to. So we're out the year before, we seal coat, crack seal and every crack that's on the road. Then we may come back the month prior to the seal coat if there was some that popped up over winter. And then if funding is appropriate, we will do some other roads that are, you know, may have severe cracking in them, like Tony mentioned before. The less water you can get, you know, prevent from getting down into the cracks and freezing and thawing, the better. Funding, I'm not overly sure. I guess I can't answer it.
Well, the reason I think the data might be helpful is that if you said, well, we got all these cracks kind of consistent. I mean, we're not budgeting enough for crack seal. You know, we're going to do seal coat in 7 years, but these roads can't wait. I mean, and if you were to have data to support more for crack sealing, I think it might be. That was one. Can I
keep going?
The breakout of the contract, I looked at that on compliance of the contract for snow and ice and cleaning and garden, and I just did some crazy math in my head that you could theoretically have 100% compliance in gardening and cleaning and then 55% in snow and ice, and you would say, well, we're 85% compliant, but the real safety issue is in the snow and ice one. I just wonder if those should be broken out so that you could find out how compliant are we in the one that really is threatening in terms of safety.
Sure.
So, okay. Now, the crack seal stuff actually also relates to the trails, and I've been alarmed. I use Cleary on and off over the years, and many years I would say, boy, they were really on top of this. This trail is maintained second to none. I mean, this just looks fantastic. That hasn't been my impression most recently. In fact, I took pictures and I called the people, you know, on the parks between
Advisory Commission.
and Scott County and the Parks Advisory Commission, and I kind of let everybody know, hey, there's some inch-wide cracks here, and you know, and I took pictures, and I said, this is not good. What? Just a visual inspection. And you've got a program again for sealing, you know, and you say you want to have it maintained at a 7 or something like that. I'm just wondering, and you do it every 2 years. I would think you'd walk it and do a visual inspection for cracks every year, and we, if it's coming out of our budget, we ought to budget. We should let a season go by with significant cracks in a county regional park trail, especially one. Now, I think I got some inconsistent information here, because I thought I was told in our advisory commission, or you know, that we do maintain some trails at a higher standard based on their usage, and if you don't, you should, because Cleary is a regional, outside our area. It has been a rollerblading trail, and if you went on the website, it would say it's a rollerblading trail. What's getting to be a dangerous rollerblading trail, in my opinion. And you know, it's way different. I mean, a county trail, nobody in their right mind goes rollerblading on I shouldn't say that, but if you're wise, you probably would go rollerblading on a county, alongside a county road on rollerblading, because you just know there's too many unevenness to the surface. You don't have the expectation that it's going to be for rollerblading. At least I don't, and I think most people don't. But when you go to Cleary, you expect that this is going to be a safe, uniform, and for rollerblading. And it's above biking, it's above walking. It's a use that's really requires it to be not have inch-wide cracks or significant problems that it does right now. So I just wonder how you handle that, and if we're spending enough. I mean, I don't want to have an unsafe rollerblading trail that we're building as a rollerblading trail in Scott County.
Thank you, Commissioner Ulrich. I should clarify that when we were talking about doing the PASER evaluation every 2 years, that's strictly for preventative maintenance. Every single year, our maintenance group goes out and reviews every mile of trail within the Three River system, including in Scott County. And they're looking for more customer service issues and in safety issues like crack sealing, branches hanging over. And the way they respond to that is if they believe there needs to be crack sealing, they try to do it before about June of that year, when the heaviest use is going to come. And I think I had communicated unfortunately in 2017, that annual review got missed with some staffing transitions in the regional parks down in Scott County. So we did have those maintenance staff when I'd gotten the information from you, Commissioner. We had our maintenance staff go out and look at the segment of trail that you were concerned with. And I think Joe and Tony joined me on that. And the feedback from that day was the cracks in that segment are looking not very good, and that they will be on the schedule next year for crack sealing, absolutely.
All right. Well, I just want to make sure that we're funding it adequately, that we're inspecting it, and, you know, crack sealing not only for safety, but also for preservation, so we don't have a big bill, you know, because we have crack sealing. That's all my questions.
Okay, great questions, thank you. Anyone else?
Mr. Chairman, speaking of trails, snowmobile usage, do we allow that on all of our trails, some of the trails, and how do we, I know the snowmobiles tend to wear them down a bit. Any compensation come from the clubs or from DNR on any of that?
Commissioner, I think the county, I'll let Joe and Lisa respond for the county road trails. For the regional trails, generally speaking, it's not allowed. If there are segments of regional trail that aren't plowed, it could be allowed, and I think that it probably would be treated differently north of the river than it would be in Scott County, and that would be a conversation if there was a need there. Did you want to answer about county roads, Lisa or Joe?
The only area that I know there's an actual trail, designated trail, is along County Highway 82, and it's generally full of snow, so we don't see any deterioration from it, between the windrows from the county plows, and the city doesn't plow it, so it's really the only spot I know. We did have one instance last year where we designated some on 101 for a year, but.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Okay. That's it, thank you very much.
Thanks, you guys.